From causing a reduction in academic abilities in children to even fatal consequences for workers who are exposed, there is so much to say about how dangerous lead can be. Globally, a project has been launched under the caption Project Every Child's Potential. How far have we gone as a country in acting on lead poisoning from the factory level? What should we be constantly looking out for when engaged in facilities? We explore this issue extensively here tonight on the show. And with me in the studio is the very right person. We couldn't have found a better person than somebody who works in the factory as a senior factories inspector. He is with the Department of Factories Inspectorate, and I'm talking about Kingsley Brimpong. Kingsley, thank you so very much for accepting our invitation here to talk on this very, very important issue. Naturally, as I said in my introduction, you interact with people randomly, and you will be surprised to find out that people don't even know what lead is. And you'll also be shocked that even when educated people are reading about lead, when they get to LEAD, because lead does not appear constantly in the media for discussions and so on, the word lead is read as lead most of the time. What I'm saying is many people don't even know what lead is. What is it?
Thank you, Moomen, for tonight, for the opportunity to educate Ghanaians on lead poisoning awareness in this country. So basically, lead is one of the oldest metals that has ever existed on Earth, and we have lead all around us in our homes, where when you use some cosmetics like the makeups, the lipsticks, some contain some amount of lead. There are some paints in our homes that also contain some amount of lead. And interestingly, there are other jewelries, scrap metals, lead acid batteries, the batteries we even use in our television remotes, these tiny, tiny lithium batteries. Some of them contain some amount of lead, but the predominant ones are basically the car batteries that we have, jewelries, some amount of some levels. There are some levels of lead in these paints that we have all around us, and some pipes. You know, in the olden days, we used to have these old metal pipes that Ghana Water used to run district waters to in some cities. All these were made of lead.
But what is lead? And you've just told us metal. What is metal doing in lipstick, for example?
You see, lead has some properties that causes most of these industries to use them, in the sense that one, lead is it's a very durable metal. It has a high malleability, very malleable, and it's the most important aspect that causes people to use lead is that it is able to stand high level corrosion. That is why it was being used to line the pipes that were underground pipes that were used to distribute waters to the various homes. And in the lipsticks, it gives that kind of durability, long lasting. That is why you find them, and some amount of toys, kids toys, you can find some amount of lead also there. So they are all over us.
So lead is everywhere, in the environment, in our homes. So right now, you and I, we sit in the studio. There are cameras all around us. We have a few television monitors, I mean about 2 or 3 that we can see. Even beyond, there is a whole area where you find more than 20 television sets that have been put together to give us that beautiful backdrop that people. So this is what this studio is made up of. Several cables. We have lead here as well. Yes,
all the monitors, the televisions you see, all these components contain some amount of lead components. You see, really, when they break down, we call our engineers to fix them. You see, when your television set break down at home, you take them to these television, they use what we call the lead soda to melt them. There's a amount of lead being introduced there. So lead can be found in electrical gadgets too. So all these electrical gadgets you see here have some amount of lead in them.
And in recent times, even though it hasn't come to the front burner yet, it's beginning to get some attention in the media, and I'm talking about the issue of lead poisoning. But when we talk about lead poisoning, now you have told us indeed what lead is, and it's all around us. Now we perceive what it is. But when we talk about its poisoning, is it that it's the one being the causal agent of the poisoning, or that it is lead that is being poisoned? What exactly does it mean?
Okay, so Moomen, when we talk about lead poisoning in Ghana, we are talking about exposure, being exposed to lead residues, and how do we get exposed? Basically, we used to have, the famous agbogbuloshi, where we do a lot of metal scrap metal there. You see, in Ghana, one of the major activities that people get exposed to lead is through this scavenging of scrap metals, especially which includes the lead acid batteries. These your old car batteries that you dump them because it's not in good shape again. You give it to the scrap dealers, they dismantle them, and then recycling of these batteries leads us to the exposure. And we have other electrical gadgets, industrial waste, paint manufacturing companies. Some of them are still using lead in their products. Right. So basically, it's as a result. The major source of it is as a result of exposure, being exposed to the lead residues that causes danger to us.
Sorry, I used it. I said because we are surrounded by lead. That's how this conversation has started.
Yeah.
And so we are exposed to lead.
Yeah.
What's the residue again?
When we talk of lead residues, people get exposed to lead, like for instance, when you come into contact with these lead acid batteries. In the course of recycling these lead acid batteries, the typical procedure is that they get these batteries as a whole, send them to the recycling sites. It contains this lead rods in them. So they manually break these batteries, get these rods from them. In the course of breaking these rods, the particles are able to come out, and we inhale them in our pipe water lines where warehouse water passes through over time. It corrodes. Occasionally there are residues of this lead being messing with the water. Occasionally, even when you go to your watches sellers, sometimes when they are serving, when they are dishing out, you hear the two metals coming together, just like that. In that order, occasionally, if those containers or if those bowls have some amount of lead in them, in the course of the fetching or dishing out this meal to you, these metals come into contact, and two metals come into contact, have a reaction or friction, and these residues mixes with the food which we even take in. And looking at the houses where we have paint spilling off, look at our children. When you have paint spilling off, occasionally some of them even pick these paints, and before you realize it's already in their mouth, so they get exposed through that. And the scavenging side, like the issue that we talked about, where after collecting all the metal scraps, they come there, try to segregate them, and you see children playing around all over the place. And this is a worry. This is a very big, serious problem, in the sense that if you have an adult and a child being exposed to the same amount of.
So, Kingsley, I'd like us to take it slowly. So we'll get there.
Sure.
But so what you are saying is that lead is not necessarily dangerous until we come into contact with its residue. Because we started this conversation by describing all the items around us which have lead in them. And almost everything has lead. I mean, you started even with the pipes used by the Ghana Water Company. Some are still in use even as we speak, those metallic pipes. You spoke about the television sets. We're on TV, we're speaking now. People are watching us from their homes. They are in touch with some form of lead, and so on. I mean, so the everyone here watching us probably has eaten this evening. The cooking may have been done in some you know, pan. Some stirring would have happened with a metallic ladle, which would have scratched the pan somehow. So I'm just saying, until there's residue, lead is not necessarily dangerous, is it?
Not entirely true. In the sense that, you know, not all these earthwares contain lead. We need to get it right. Not all of them contain lead. We're talking about those that contain lead in the process of, you know, one thing about lead is that it is very, very malleable, in the sense that it can be shaped into different forms. So people enjoy using it, or companies feel once they can mold it to any shape they want, they mix it with other metals to create certain conditions. So what we are saying is that, you know, people don't get really exposed to lead, because you can't just take a lead rod and put it in your mouth. Basically, you can't do that. All that when we talk of lead residues, you know, we inhale these particles. These residues come in the form of particles. They suspend in the air. You inhale them, they go straight into your mouth. Then the clinicians will tell you the dangers that are associated with this. But our interest is, as the occupational health and safety officers, our main concern is how people are exposed to this lead. Because the mode of transmission is when you are exposed to these lead residues. Yes.
I get it now. So what are the exact dangers? And you were talking about children and adults, and so what do children have a different kind of reaction to lead residue from that which adults have?
Okay. I'm a clinician, so I'll be very careful in handling that. Okay, so per our research, basically children are more susceptible to lead poisoning than adults, in the sense that the slightest, in fact there's no safe zone, but there's no safe exposure level for children, because the moment a child is exposed to lead, or let's assume a child and an adult are exposed to equal amount of lead, the child has the ability to ingest the lead 4 to 5 times more than the adult.
Really?
Yes. So when a child also ingests such amount of lead into the system, it has direct consequences, in the sense that it affects their brain formation, of the development of their brain. It impedes the development of their brain, which the clinicians will tell you that it actually has impact on their growth, in their developmental growth. You know, adults react to this when their exposure is over a long period of time. You see, lead exposure in adults is basically one of those occupational health diseases. You know, occupational health diseases, basically most of them are chronic diseases, where they have a longer latent period, because as adults we have stronger immune system that will be able to handle these things. So after a longer period before we are able to exhibit some of these signs that the clinicians talks about. But children have, even though they might not show immediately, at the end of the day, it affects their cognitive functions at the end of the day compared to adults. Adults, the longer exposure leads to, the end result can lead to cardiovascular disease, cardiovascular death, and kidney diseases. But in children, it's right from the onset affects their cognitive functions, their brain development.
Wow.
Yes.
Just being exposed to residue of lead can, wow. To be honest with you, I sit here, and I believe I'm well educated. I interact with people who are very well educated. This is the first time I've ever engaged in a conversation about something that many people would never have suspected contributes to many of the diseases that we report to the hospitals these days. Because right here on this platform also, what you've just spoken about, heart diseases, kidney diseases, liver diseases, these are the things that whenever we open the phone lines for people to talk about their health problems, these are the issues that come up. Could it be the fact that a majority, some substantial number of Ghanaians are exposed to lead in different ways but do not know? Is that possible?
You may not be too, you may not be too far from right, went too far from right. You know, the challenge is that, you know, we don't have many occupational clinicians around. So when we present certain conditions to health facilities, they just request for your symptoms, run 1 or 2 tests, without basically entrenching or making more emphasis on your work history. So I believe that if clinicians will dive back to work history, pick it from there, then we will be able to identify whether your nature of work exposed you to some amount of lead there, hence causing you the problems you are going through now. But because we don't have much occupational clinicians, these are general practitioners who basically, you know, these symptoms are similar to other conditions, so they may take them as other conditions, which basically they may be lead poisoning,
right,
in a sense.
So I'd like to also understand the remit within which you work. I mean, I'm talking about the Department of Factories Inspectorate. What exactly do you do, and which are the kinds of factories that fall under your remit, so to speak? Okay,
good. So the Department of Factories Inspectorate, we are the national body or the main regulators of occupational health and safety issues in the country. We are empowered by the Factories of and Shops Act 328 1970 to be a lead in terms of occupational health and safety related issues in the country. What we do is that now we call ourselves Factories Inspectorate, but technically what we describe as a factory, we are workplaces where you have engaged 1 or 2 persons, more than 2 persons, in an activity for the gain of the government or the individual. That place comes under our purview. Now, Secretary, we are supposed to come there to ensure that safety standards are being observed there. Basically, occupational health and safety standards are being observed there. So basically, as a department, our mandate is to ensure that occupational health and safety standards are observed at every workplace in the country.
Every workplace, including GBC.
Including GBC.
I've never seen you here. You have never. And this today, until when I started preparing for this conversation, I didn't even know about your existence. And I'm not saying if I don't know, it means every other Ghanaian doesn't know, but it means you're not very visible. That's the story it tells me. I'm wrong?
Interestingly, we are very visible. As at now, we are in almost all the previous 10 regions. We were highly represented in all the 10 regions.
But I'm just saying, GBC, state agency, state public broadcaster, we have different studios, several studios here. This is the first time I am encountering you here, and you are here for a conversation and not to see the environment within which we work, how safe it is as your mandate.
Yeah.
Where was the last place you visited to? And I'm sorry, I'm not subjecting the Factories Inspectorate to a test here, but I'm just trying to get the public to understand the remit within which you work, and how far and the extent to which you do that work. That's why I'm asking these questions. Tell me about it.
Okay. So per the Factories, Offices and Shops Act at 328, we are supposed to visit all workplaces, and these workplaces include factories, mainstream factories, offices, shops, people who are into warehousing, shipping yards, docks. So once you have engaged anybody in an activity, that activity has some amount of hazard associated with it, definitely we are supposed to come there and ensure that occupational health and safety measures are being observed there. So as a department, we've been in existence for some time. Initially, we're joined together with the Labor Department until we were separated from them. So we are everywhere, actually.
Yeah. Because as journalists, of course, we get to move around and observe. You go to many places and there's no fire point, for example. And I'm not saying that's exactly what you have to do, but it's part of safety.
Exactly.
Fire service would have to deal with that, of course, but given the explanation you've given me here, there must be a point where people can gather in case of fire. You go to many places, these safety regulations are not complied by. You are aware of this, but we haven't seen any action taken by your office against such people. Have you prosecuted, perhaps even punished any organization for not complying in the last maybe 1 year or so?
Yes, Moomen, we have. I wouldn't want to be specific. Just recent this, I think the second quarter of this year, we even prosecuted an institution in Kumasi, which I wouldn't want to mention the name. But basically, what we do is that we do constant routine inspections, where these routine inspections comes with certain designed or designated checklist. So when we visit a factory or when we visit an office, a premises, with this checklist, we do our inspections, where the assembly point you talk about is one major thing. You know, as part of our mandate, one of the major things we do is training and education. We are more into the preventive aspect than
the creative. All right. Okay. So I'm just looking at specifically with industry, factories, persons who are responsible for ensuring the safety not just of their workers but the rest of us in society. As you go about doing this, to what extent are such persons aware of the dangers posed to every one of us, but especially our children, about lead poisoning? What's the extent of knowledge?
Okay. So, Moomen, what we do is that when we visit these industries that are purely into lead recycling, like the scrap recycling companies and then the lead acid battery recycling companies, the first major thing we do there is to do a risk assessment of the place. We have them submit a risk assessment where we review this assessment to see the mitigating factors. You know, in every system, per mandate, we use what we call the hierarchy of control. We expect that once there is an object or there is a machine or there is a procedure that may pose some kind of harm to an individual or poses as a hazard, using the hierarchy of control, the first thing we expect that at least there should be something we call an elimination method. And interestingly, elimination becomes difficult because that is the nature of the work of the person. Then what comes in? Substitution comes in. Can the person substitute what he is doing with it? The person needs to be recycling of lead acid batteries. He can't substitute unless he stops that work. Then the next level we come has to do with engineering controls. So what can we put in place? Like in our recent inspections and educations, we realized that some of these recycling, which we call the ULAB companies, were manually collect these lead acid batteries. We have individuals who manually break these batteries take out these lead rods, then send them to the melting point for it to be melted. As part of engineering control, which some institutions have taken note, now most of these systems has been automated, where the main work of the individual is to pack these batteries, feed it into the machine. There's a procedure which breaks these plastic parts, segregates it to the rod, and it goes through that process. So that is one aspect of the controls. And then the other aspect has to do with administrative controls, whereby management puts measures in place that eventually this is the work we are doing. Like GBC here, we are exposed to cameras. We can't do away with our television sets.
True.
We can't do away with everything. So what measures can we put in place to help protect the people? Then the personal protective equipment issue comes in. PPEs, what we call PPEs, where we have to provide them with nose masks, with gloves, with safety boots, depending on the nature of work that the person is doing. So through this, we ensure that, and even interestingly, when it comes to the personal protective equipment aspect, the law is actually in three folds, Moomen. It is not just the responsibility of the employer to provide. It's the responsibility of the employer to maintain what he has provided. And the last part of the law is that it's supposed to enforce the usage. So when we visit the premises and any aspect of this law is being contravened, as preventive institution, what we do is that we educate the persons there. on the need why they need to use these PPE is provided. Okay, and one major aspect is the need not to transfer clothing used at work to your homes.
Right.
Because eventually, why are we giving you this clothing at work? Because we want to limit your level of exposure. And you, the same person, carries these materials, this clothing back home. Eventually, there may be residues on them, your shoes, your bags and other things. You send them to your kids at home. You just get home, you just dump your bag there. Your baby innocently picks the bag, tries to be daddy, and eventually, whatever you were preventing at work, you've carried it home. So one of the major things is that in these high-risk areas where there's a high level of lead exposure, what we encourage is that there should be a changing room system where clothing that you use at work are strictly kept there, so that you don't even transfer them home. There was a case, there was a case in India where we studied, where the woman actually was suffering from these normal TB signs, symptoms at the hospital. So fortunately for her, she met an occupational health clinician. So in the course of trying to get her history, they were trying to find out whether she has actually worked in certain conditions, certain work environment. And interestingly, she had never worked before, but her husband, who had died about 5 years ago, had worked there. And her responsibility was washing the clothing of the husband after work. So inversely, the whole thing was transferred to her at home. So the disease condition that killed the husband 5 years ago was the same disease that was going to kill her if it was not identified early. Meanwhile, she had never stepped foot in a factory before. All right.
But so, you see, throughout the conversation so far, the areas where people can pick up residue of lead, which then leads to the poisoning and all the other repercussions, have to do with factories and workplaces. Children do not work. They go to school. Children do not go to factories. They are in schools or in the house. So if most of the residue is from factories and from workplaces and so on, how then are children affected in the first place?
Okay, earlier on when I was talking, the sources of lead exposure, I mentioned jewelries, I mentioned children's toys. There are some toys, I'm not saying all children's toy plates, but there are some toys that contain some amount of lead in them. And there are some jewelries, occasionally we give out jewelries to these our children to use. Some jewelries contain some amount of lead, so they are exposed through there. And let's take a typical case like the Agbogboshi case, for instance. Before that place was put in order, you realize that you find children and adults all playing all over the place.
Okay, so you've been talking about Agbogboshi. There are a lot more places. You go to a Shaman area, you will find a place, and I don't know if it still exists, but about a month ago, they were still burning these stuff in those areas. So Agbogboshi may have been dealt with, but we still have other sites across Accra in particular, but the rest of the nation as well, where the burning of such material is still ongoing, is very much alive.
Yeah, that is why a campaign like this is in the right direction. It couldn't have been in a better time than this. That is why we are running a campaign like this to sensitize people out there that we have ways that our children are being exposed to. Because the children's cases are worse because of the cognitive effects it has on them. You see, a child between the age of 0 to 1 or 1 to 5 is trying, at that period, the brain is now developing. And once the child is exposed to some amount of lead, it automatically has dire consequences on the cognitive development of the child. And this child will grow up to be, in quote, very dumb, which I believe when the clinicians get their attention here, they'll be able to explain that further for you. I wouldn't want to try that. So that is our worry. So we should be careful in our homes when we are purchasing these toys for our children. We should be careful the kind of paint we even use in our homes, the painting of our houses, especially when these paints are peeling off. We should be cautious that our children don't carry these paints in their mouths. And then, our mummies, the kind of lipsticks they buy, that's something that contain lead. I know children love to play with it. They will just go and pick mommy's lipstick before you realize she has taken the face, mommy's makeup. All these places that our children are actually exposed to, even though they are not at our workplaces.
Wow, that's very true. Now, so given the extent to which lead poisoning can affect human health, and affect the cognitive abilities of children in particular, is it not possible to come up with a law, for example, in Ghana, that bans the use of lead for anything? That, look, instead of lead, use some other metallic material to do whatever it is that you want to do, because this poses great danger to all of us.
EPA will be in best position to answer this particular question because of our level of work boundaries when it comes to lead importation and lead.
No, but is this something that you, from your office at the Department of Factories Inspectorate, would ever recommend? I mean, EPA can do based on what recommendations come from offices like yours.
Basically, it's one of the things we will highly support and recommend, in the sense that looking at the level of exposure, the mediums of being exposure. That is the point. The medium of exposure. There are alternatives you can use because it's not all children toys that contains this lead. It is not all the makeups that contains this lead. It's not all the lipsticks that contain this lead. It's not all the paints actually that contains this lead. So as parents, what we need to do is, when we are purchasing these items, we want to buy the ones that are lead free. When we are laying pipes, I know most of the Ghana Water has changed most of these lead pipes that transmit water to various homes, but the issue is that just like you said earlier, some of the pipes are still there. Some of them, because of their ability to withstand corrosion, so some of them are still there, especially when you go to the coastal lines. So as a country, we need to get to the stage where we'll be able to get rid of all these ones, and like the lead acid batteries, for instance. We are driving. It's not that we are thinking of going through. We are trying to reduce our CO emission. Even the electric cars that are coming, they are all going to use batteries, purely, basically. And you should also look at that aspect. Once you are trying to reduce our carbon emissions or carbon footprints, we are trying to bring in more batteries. And these batteries, are they lead acid batteries or not? If they are lead acid batteries, then we should look at it again. Because after these batteries have expanded their lifespan, how do we get rid of them? How do we recycle them?
So maybe I'll rephrase that question, and instead of directing it at your department, we'll look at it from the broader angle. And you work within that industry, so you should know whether or not, as a country, we have taken any tangible, visible, concrete steps towards dealing with this very, very sensitive issue.
In all honesty, the scale of exposure is not really documented. The scale of exposure is not really well documented in the country. That is why UNICEF with GSG saw this as a need. That it's never too late to start something. So that's what we have started this project. We will take it one at a time. I'm sure once Moomen tonight is a very big platform, which most people will adhere to this. People will be shocked at some of these things we are saying, but I'm sure the education will go on, so it reaches the target that we have set for ourselves.
So when you go around to some of these workplaces and factories, and you begin to draw their attention to the dangers posed by, and sometimes they don't know really, when you draw their attention to these dangers, what sort of reaction do you get from them to start with? What sort of cooperation do you also get from them, if at all?
In general, no employee loves the visit of a regulator, and the nature of our inspections is such that it is unannounced. We don't inform you. The reason why we don't inform our inspection visits is what we do. I told you earlier on that we are in the preventive business. So what we want to do, it's a fact-finding inspection. We want to see the realities. It's like having a notice that a visitor will be in your house. Basically, you put your things in order. But when we come, occasionally, we want to come to see what you are doing there. So some of the reactions we see, some of these industries, you need some kind of top management clearance before they allow you access. So there will be some kind of 1 or 2 resistance But eventually we always have a way to enter the place, because the law mandates that I don't need to inform them before I enter the place. And if you prevent me from entering the place, it's a contravention to the law. So I need to come there to see what you are doing, so that I can advise. Their fear is that you're going to close them down. Their fear is that you are going to give punitive measures. But we let them understand that our nature of work is more of preventive than punitive, in the sense that we want to see what you are doing. We want to advise you accordingly, because if you clean your homes, it won't give me a true picture of whatever is happening there. Let me see the realities there, so that basically you might not know that this particular activity, there are other alternatives that I can do to protect the health and safety of my people. Then through that dialogue, we'll be able to reach a consensus. So basically we have places that we have, sometimes we occasionally have few altercations, but basically we have a lot of cooperation for the people. And as workers, sometimes some of these things not only led other health and safety conditions. Sometimes when you educate them, some of them accept it in good faith. Then they understand the system, and then they change. Others, too, just like typical human beings, will automatically resist you. They will tell you with the MBA tag, I've been doing this thing for so many years, I've not had any effect. It is there that we tell them that, you know, in occupational health and safety diseases are diseases which are basically they are not acute conditions. They are chronic conditions. They may not surface now. Basically, you are working in company A today. Tomorrow you might be in company B. Before you realize, during company B, you realize that there are some conditions, these conditions that you started exhibiting. Meanwhile, you picked it from company A. So you have to protect yourself right from company A before you go to company B.
No, very true. But again, as you go around, and you have indicated that there are places that you face some resistance, some opposition, and so on. Yet the law mandates you to do this, and that it will be a contravention of the law if anybody tries to prevent you from going in. But what evidence do you have to show that indeed you are not some imposter who's trying to come into the space and so on? There must be some identification, something.
Exactly. Yes. We don't just stand up and go there. Usually most of these inspections are done in official vehicles, and every inspector that comes to premises must show his or her identification. Every inspector has an ID card that he shows to the occupier, so that the occupier will be informed where he or she is coming from. And there are many ways he or she can check if he wants to verify. That is why we always advise our inspectors to go in official vehicles. You know, government has provided some amount of vehicles to do these things, so we need to go with them. And then when the person requests for identification, because you're entering someone's premises, you should be able to provide that form of identification.
Okay, so Kojo Ansum Mensah says, Moomen, please ask your guests if okay, so I'm reading the message just as it was sent, so I'm likely to make. Please, when you are sending messages, just take your time and read through again before you send, so that it saves us the trouble of having to edit whilst we try to read. Okay, so you say, please find out from your guests, when he and his officers visit some of these factories, do they also not give room for people? Okay, I mean, what you mean to say is it not possible for the people who go to the factories to be bribed so that they can leave the space and allow work to go on as usual? This is how you've sent it, but the sense I make of the message is, so when you go visiting, and we've seen that with some other departments and so on, they pay a visit, and then there's even though they've seen the wrong thing being done, there's a negotiation, some monies exchange hands, and then people leave. What mechanisms have you put in place to ensure that your officers, when they go there, are not compromised? I'm sure that's what the texter wants to say.
Great Moomen. Before I go there, interestingly, the department runs a very transparent and we of high integrity. 2019, we received 2 awards. 2 awards in terms of integrity, and then running an open charter from PEP. So these are the mechanisms in place. You know, every visit that you go as an inspector, once inspection is done, we have what we call we have what we call notice of compliance. Notice of compliance. That is, once you identify certain contraventions of the act in there, you immediately issue the people notice of compliance. This notice of compliance is issued in two folds, where you sign, whoever took you around or whoever senior management is there countersigns, you give a copy to the person and you bring a copy to the office and file and put on the files of these companies. Every company has a file in the office. You know, when there is an incident in any of these factories, or when there's the need to prosecute any of these factories, one of the evidences you use is this notice of compliance. That on this day I visited the factory, I saw that there were these contraventions of 1, 2, 3. You were given 2 weeks to do them. After 2 weeks, the person follows us with a check inspection to see if these contraventions have been attended to. So I can say on authority that in our institution, or from our end, the Department of Factories Inspectorate, our work, the safety of the people is paramount to us. So there is no exchange of hands, money exchange of hands there, in the sense that if you even try that, it's against our law. You try to bribe an officer, which is a criminal offense. So eventually, what we do is that we don't even go there at all. We don't even, because whatever I see is what I put on. But that is why it is fact finding. I need to come there, see, tell you what I see there, advise you, because it is not one thing you should understand. It is not punitive. We're not going to. We get to the prosecution end when the occupier is being adamant, when there are several notices.
Right. Okay, so as we prepare to wrap up the conversation, let's begin to look at the way forward. For example, so you've talked about the dangers posed by lead poisoning to human health, but particularly to children who, apart from the physical health issues, also suffer from cognitive disabilities, so to speak. What can we begin to do as a country to reduce the danger posed to all of us?
Okay, Moomen, the first thing when I was talking about the hierarchy of control, I talked about elimination.
Yes.
So the first thing that we advise is that, one, we should prevent our children and our pregnant women from being exposed to these recycling sites, lead acid battery recycling. So that's the first point. That's the elimination procedure. When as parents or as adults, you should also check out for lead containing product that contain some of these lead that I have identified earlier on. So when you are buying them, you should be able to check out whether this particular product, I'm buying a paint, is it a paint that contains lead or not? Because of my children and myself. If I'm buying a lipstick, is it a lipstick that contains lead or not? So we need to look at that. And then we should also, parents should also avoid bringing their work attires home, especially those that know that their work exposes them to some amount of lead residues and other harmful agents. We should avoid the act of bringing work attires home. The other thing is that we need to do a needs assessment of our home. For example, when paints are peeling off in our buildings, we are doing repainting, they are peeling off, we are buying toys, we are buying these ceramics. We need to be very sure that these products contain lead or not. And the other one is we need to practice good sanitation. Good sanitation, because it's not just about lead poisoning, it's about basically all other conditions. So we need to practice good sanitation. And then the other process will be to stop the process entirely, which most of these industries have mechanized. They are trying to limit the human face, especially in the recycling sector. They've limited the human face. Recently, we developed an SOPs with EPA for them, where they are following assiduously to revamp their industry to limit the level of exposure of these lead acid batteries to their workers, where most of these processes being automated, so that the exposure level is minimized. So,
and one of the major sources of lead poisoning I have identified from this conversation has to do with car batteries in particular. Car batteries run out, even where they are brand new batteries, maximum 2.5 years, they will run out, and so they would have to be replaced. How do we dispose of car batteries safely without necessarily exposing ourselves, the rest of the society?
Great. That is why we have these ULAB centers, that they are specialized recyclers and that handle lead acid battery recyclers. So the main purpose is to make an arrangement to get this thing, get these lead batteries to them, for them to, because they have the procedure to recycle these things effectively. The challenge is that how can you pick just one car battery and then send them to the ULAB recycling center? Some of them are in Pung. How do you go all the way there? So what we advise is that at the point of purchasing these car batteries, where most of the shops that you purchase them, I know some of them, they will even love to take the old ones from you because they can package them very well and then send them to the recycling center. So it's an arrangement you can make it where you purchase your car batteries, that when it's older you want to buy a new one, you can send the old one there. They will have a way of getting them to this ULAB recycling center than just giving them to this normal regular scrap dealers or this truck pushers, whereby they will eventually go and just dump them somewhere and then they expose us to these dangers.
You go into the private home garages of several people, you are bound to find not just the cars parked in the garage, but old batteries and other metallic. Sometimes I wonder what people keep these things for. Is it dangerous when you keep a battery, for example, 2, 3, 4 old batteries in a garage which is mostly enclosed and so on? Is that also dangerous? You are not burning it anyway. It's just there. People do that all the time.
It becomes dangerous when you yourself or any of your children come into contact with it. Provided where you've parked them, nobody is coming into contact with it. Once any of your children go there, they come into contact with it. They are exposed to the terminals. You know, these the terminals. That is where the lead. Those are the rods. That part is also lead. So once these children come into contact, but why do you keep these things there? Once you are not using them, get them to the right place for them to be recycled, so that at least your home will be safe. But the major concern is the paint, where we occasionally paint our houses. So when you are going in for paint, ask for lead-free paints.
Oh, there's lead-free paints.
Exactly. There are lead-free paints in the market. Ask for them, and then use these paints to do your painting to save your children that level of exposure.
So why are we still allowing manufacturers to manufacture paints that has lead, knowing that, look, our children will be exposed? I could go to a shop and say I want lead-free paint. How sure would I be that the paint they have sold to me is actually lead-free?
The last time we spoke to EPA in relation to this issue,
yes,
the challenge was that most of these local manufacturing companies are telling they are not using lead based on the risk assessment we have received from them. When we analyze and realize that most of them are not using lead. So now the challenge has to do with the importation. Actually, it's banned in the country, but you know, we have some unscrupulous people managing to bring some in. So the challenge is that actually lead paints are banned in the country. Its importation is banned in the country, but we have some of them still finding their way onto the market. That is why we are conscientizing people to be careful when they are going out for these paints. They should request for these lead-free paints.
I got a message earlier. Let me just go back to it before we wrap up. Okay, so I've seen it. It's from Amo Seidu. Wow, okay, Amo Seidu. He says, Moomen, you and your guests keep using big English. What do you mean when you talk about cognitive abilities? Can you break that down so that the ordinary person gets to understand the message you're trying to drive home? Okay, Seidu. Yes, so mine is to ask the question. He says cognitive. We spoke about, and you began using that word cognitive relative to children and how lead affects them. What exactly he wants to know?
Basically, we're talking about their brain functions. The ability for, between the ages of 1 to 5, the children's brain are still being developed. So once they're exposed to lead, it affects their brain development, which is very severe in children. It affects their behavior at the end of the day. It has dire consequences on their behavior and their ability to think very well when they grow up and function very well. Yes.
So in essence, by exposing our children to lead poisoning in particular, we could be doing them a lot of harm, because apart from just giving them physical illnesses, they could also become, and cognitive, it's got to do with the brain,
exactly.
so to speak. So they go to school and they cannot keep the pace with their other colleagues who perhaps would not have been exposed, and then we turn around and call the children stupid. But we would have exposed them to some circumstances that would have led to a situation where they are not able to keep up with their respond to simple instructions. They can't do simple tasks because they are slow thinkers, basically because we, through our actions, have exposed them unnecessarily to lead. Have I summarized it well?
Basically.
What will be your final words even as we wrap up?
Good. So basically, my final words is that lead poisoning is real. Lead exposure is a problem now. Just even as of last week, CDC updated their system saying that in actual sense about 200,000 to 500,000 people, children, are being exposed to lead now. So what we advise as parents, we owe our children some level of duty of care. We should all join. We are requesting opinion leaders, community leaders, leaders of church to join the campaign whereby we would protect our children from lead exposure by advising our people in the choices of gadgets and the choices of things that we use in our homes to be able to protect our children fully.
Kingsley Brimpong, Senior Factories Inspector, Department of Factories Inspectorate, has been my guest tonight here on Moomen Tonight as we focus our attention on lead poisoning awareness with the focus on protecting every child's potential. Do not expose your children unnecessarily to lead poisoning. Kingsley has told us that there is potential in poisoning our children when we buy jewelry that is lead laden. He says we should avoid buying toys for our children, toys that are laden with lead as well. And he also says for those of us who have batteries all over the house, let's not keep the old batteries because they have a lot of lead. Children like to lick and suck on these things, and it could end up poisoning their system, making them slow thinkers, affect their cognitive ability, and so on. And so that's basically what it is. On another occasion, it comes from the background of a factory inspector. We will get health experts here who will then tell us what lead does to the system and why we should all avoid its poisoning. Thank you very much, Kingsley. It's been I felt like I was in a classroom having this conversation with you. Great. Thank you so very much, Kingsley Brimpong, Senior Factories Inspector, Department of Factories Inspectorate. I will see you again tomorrow when we bring you another edition of Moomen Tonight. Have a very good night. Bye-bye. When the voices that matter speak, they speak to GBC. They speak on Moomen Tonight.
By some of your appointments, you appear to be creating a parallel civil service. 2020 is not too far away from today. Are we seeing a comeback? Would you say that HIPIC truly served any purpose?
The death overhang